Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Brad from Lone Wolf and you join me today in the local forest once again. Today we're going to be looking at gas stoves, various different gas stoves that are out on the market. Now, as usual, I'm not being sponsored, I'm not being paid to do this video, so rather than having every single gas stove that's on the market, I've just got a general overview of the different types of gas stoves that you can get. As with everything, they have their advantages and disadvantages. I'll go through all of them as we go along. There are some things that are universal to every single one, and there are some things that are unique to every single gas stove. I'll start off with the pros of all the gas stoves, and that's every gas stove that I've got here, possibly with the exception of one. They are quicker boiling than transier stoves. They're normally the next step up. People go from transier stoves to gas stoves. They are quicker than transier stoves, generally between 3 and 5 minutes to boil a litre of water. Again, there is an exception in these stoves, and I'll point that out when I get to it. They tend to be lighter than transier stoves, a lot lighter than transier stoves. For example, without the gas cylinder, that is one of them, compared to a transier stove, which is massive, basically. As I say, there are different varieties on the market, different types on the market, and I'll be showing you the various different ones as we go along. Another pro of each of these stoves is the fact that if you get a screw thread cylinder, they are universal, so that if you have a look at the screw thread on that, it is exactly the same as the screw thread on that cylinder. So if they are screw threads, they tend to be universal fitting. There is a difference between this gas cylinder and this gas cylinder, and again I'll show you that as and when appropriate. So the first one I want to show you in depth is this one. It's more or less a family cook set. You've probably seen these around. There's loads of different variants of them. This is one of the early ones, and it comes in its own case. There are now two updated versions of these stoves now. The first update to this was this plate here. On this version, this is actually separate. You can actually take it off. On a subsequent update, this became fixed, so that this no longer lifts up on and off. Bit of a safety thing, and makes it a little bit easier. And really, the second update, the latest update to them, is that you can now not only run them off the cylinder that's in there, the cylindrical cylinder, but you can actually run them off of one of these. Which is a fantastic update, makes it a lot easier to get the gas. Anyway, these stoves, this one's the Bistro 250. Like I say, it's one of the early ones, probably one of the first ones that were actually on the market. Put it a bit further in shot there. Pros to this one, it's incredibly stable, incredibly low to the ground, and so easy to operate that a 5-year-old can operate this one. And I'm not joking, a 5-year-old could operate this one. So, gas cylinder goes in there, goes inside there, and is completely detachable, like so. All of these gas cylinders have got this little notch in the cylinder there. That has to line up with a little tab in the stove itself. Put that in. Little lever there, push the lever down, make sure the cover's closed, and then this is your regulator here. but it's also got a piezo ignition. So you turn it on, goes click, and I don't know if you can see the flame there, but it is lit, just to prove it. There you go. To turn it off, all you do is turn it like that. Let's turn the regulator back. So that's the advantages to this stove. The disadvantages, as you can see, it's quite big. You certainly wouldn't want to take it backpacking, that's for sure. In this configuration, these cylinders can at times be quite hard to get hold of. At times, not always. Another disadvantage, although it's quite high output, it tends to take a very long time to boil a litre of water, and I'm not entirely sure why. So, but that's the Bistro style of gas stoves. Let's pop that away. Back into its case. This is another pro to Bistro styles, is they usually come with a case to keep it all nice and packed away without being damaged in any way. The next stove, or the next style of stove that I want to move on to, is once again its own little self-contained unit. That's the Jetboil. Most people have either heard of a Jetboil or seen a Jetboil or used a Jetboil. Now, the advantages of these is extraordinarily quick boiling time, so you're looking at 90 seconds for half a litre of water in this case. It's all self-contained, so everything actually fits within the Jetboil itself. This is something different, I'll come on to this in a minute. But that is pretty much everything that you get in the Jetboil. Now, what helps with the Jetboil being extraordinarily quick in boiling a litre of water is the way it's designed. So in there, you might be able to see them, these fins. Now, the Jetboil company actually call that a heat exchanger. I'm not going to say anything about that, but they call it heat exchanger. Once it's all gone, once you put the actual stove itself on, you can see that not a lot of heat can actually escape. That's where it can be. That's where it can be so efficient. The gas cylinder itself, 9 times out of 10, the gas cylinder itself is also unique in that it uses a mixture of fuel. In this case, I'll show you that, isobutane and propane. Now, what's the difference between that and standard gas cylinder, you might ask? There is a difference. In this case, the isobutane is a winter fuel mix. So it's something called Boyle's law, and essentially basically means that the colder a gas gets, the less efficient it gets. Certain things you can do to help that. You can either keep the gas itself warm, or you can make a mixture that will actually help prevent the gas freezing. Isobutane does that. You still need to keep the gas warm. It still will start losing efficiency out up to a certain temperature, but you do need to. It does help with that. Standard gas cylinder, it's just a normal butane propane mix. Really doesn't fare well in cold weather. Propane's a little bit better than butane, but it's still not as good. So I'll put that out of the way. Another advantage, now this only works with the Jetboil gas cylinders and this size, and that actually fits inside the Jetboil itself. So, take the cap off. I'll demonstrate what that is in a minute. Okay, so that's the gas cylinder itself on the Jetboil. So, pros and cons of the Jetboil. Well, first of all, I've already mentioned the big pro, which is well, it's the biggest selling point actually, is the incredibly fast boil time of 90 seconds for half a litre of water. Size, you can see it's relatively compact. The gas cylinder itself fitting inside the Jetboil itself, in fact everything fitting inside the Jetboil itself is a massive pro. It makes it, you know, once its pack size is down, it's only that big. Relatively small, relatively lightweight. So that's the pro of Jetboil. On to the cons. Big con for me, and it has been addressed. In fact, all these cons have been addressed. I don't like. I call this style a stack 'em high stove. There's nothing wrong with it. You just got to be aware of how and where your stove is, because I generally find a stack 'em high stove can be pushed over quite easily. Now, with the Jetboil, it's actually all fixed together, so it makes it a little bit harder. Jetboil have actually addressed this. That's what this is for. You fold that out, becomes a triangle. It fits onto the bottom of the stove like that. Becomes a lot more stable. Okay. The other con with a Jetboil, I'll move that into a bit better shot for you. The other con with the Jetboil is, up until recently, I say recently, this was it. You couldn't do anything else with this stove. You had to use this pot, which kind of limited what you could do with it, apart from boil water and maybe boil some spaghetti and pasta, things like that. Jetboil, in their infinite wisdom, have actually addressed that. So I can actually take the pot itself off. This ring, again, fold it out the little stabilizers, and go straight on top of the stove there. Disadvantage to this is you lose the efficiency, but you get the flexibility of using whatever pots you want. So again, like with everything when it comes to the outdoors, swings and roundabouts, pros and cons. What you're gaining in some things, you lose in other things. But that is the Jetboil. And I'll put all of that away on camera so you can see that it actually does all fit together. All go into Jetboil itself. Just got to remember which way round everything goes now. And don't forget the little cap for the gas stove. There you go, that's the Jetboil. You can see how small it is. This is the Jetboil. This is the one with the piezo ignition on it. Actually, with that in mind, quick word about gas stoves with the piezo ignition. Always take a box of matches or a lighter as well, because you can never guarantee that the piezo ignition is always going to work. Just a little side note there. Okay, moving on to the next type of stove. It's this one. Now, these are on the market. These are variously known as Spyder stoves or Space Landers. Either one, doesn't really matter. Okay, so as you can see, it's quite low to the ground there. It is there. Okay, advantages to these type of stoves. First of all, they're a lot First of all, they're a lot more stable than most of the other stoves, with the exception of the Bistro, of course, because they're a lot lower to the ground. Secondly, they run from a pipe, which means you can use both that canister and the other canister, and it won't affect the height of the stove itself. It doesn't become a Stack'em stove. Cons: they're a lot bigger than some of the other gas stoves on the market. 2, they need this pipe, which again is called a heat exchanger by the various different companies. Another con is they tend to be a little bit more. They tend to need a little bit more maintenance than other types of stoves, just because of the pipe there. But apart from that, that's really the cons. I prefer these stoves over the Stack'em stoves just because they are lower to the ground. They're a little bit harder to tip over. The controls themselves, which are here. Now this one doesn't have a piezo ignition, so you would need box matches for this. But controls are actually away from the stove. I'm just going to screw this on so I can show you. So the controls themselves are actually here, not by the stove. So that's another advantage in that you're less likely to burn yourself when you're operating this stove. So that's the Spacelander stoves. These would be, if anybody was upgrading from a Trangia to a gas stove, it would be either this or a Jetboil that I would recommend, simply because of stability and ease of use, really. And like I say, with the controls back here, you're less likely to burn yourself. Okay, last stove. I'll leave this cylinder here because we're going to need it. So the last stove that we're going to have a look at is this type of stove. Little pocket rocket. You've probably seen these, heard about these. The pros to these are immediately obvious. Look at the size of it. Look at the size of that. Absolutely tiny. Can actually fit in your pocket if you needed it to. They tend to be a little bit quicker than the Spacelander type stoves because the gas is being fed directly to the stove itself. Generally just screw straight on top of the gas cylinder like so. Cons to these type of stoves. The reason I don't recommend these stoves to people moving up from a Trangia to a gas stove: 1, your controls are there, so it's right underneath the right underneath the stove itself. Potentially higher risk of burning yourself, setting yourself on fire. This one doesn't have a piezo ignition, so you need matches to light the stove itself. Another con, if you imagine that this is the cylinder, you then got the stove, and then, just for argument's sake, I'm going to use the Jetboil for itself as a pot. On top of that, obviously you can see it's actually gone out of the camera frame, so you can see it's becoming higher, and as it's becoming higher, it's becoming less and less stable, to the point that that can happen. I actually pushed that off then in case you didn't see it. That's why I don't like these type of stoves. I'll use them, and I've had massive success with them. I don't like them, and I wouldn't recommend them to people who haven't got experience with gas stoves, purely because the risk of burning yourself is too high. That's it, that's the only reason. But apart from that, if you've used them, they are fantastic. And it is literally one of those things, you can fit it in your pocket if you needed to. As I say, I'm not being sponsored by anybody to do this video. I'm not being paid by anybody to do this video. And this isn't an in-depth review of every single gas stove out on the market. It's just an overview to give you an idea of the various different stoves on the market. And if you're looking into a gas stove, the various pros and cons of each one. I hope that helps, and I shall see you in the next video. Bye for now.